welcome to the first episode of Airing Addiction in 2022. We're really excited to be here today. I'm going to introduce our co-host, and I'm really excited about our guest today. But before I do that, I just figured the new year is a great time to, refresh our lives and reset and have some wonderful recovery conversations. And so, this podcast will be, it's live now on Facebook and it'll be available today later as a podcast. And so I welcome you all to search Airing Addiction as a podcast, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any of our fantastic episodes this year and in future years. I'm really excited about the work that we're about to do, and share it, right? Share this message of recovery. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jesse, who is going to introduce our guest for the first of the year.
The first episode of the year. Can't believe it. Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jesse. I work here at New England Recovery Center, also somebody in recovery. And I too love starting off the new year with something positive, something uplifting, something inspirational. And I couldn't think of any better story to start off the new year than with Richard's story. Richard is someone I've known for over 2 years now, Richard. And it's been a joy and a journey, or a joy to watch his journey. And to start off, good morning, Richard.
Good morning.
Good morning. And just to open up, to share whatever you feel comfortable with your personal story, how you came to New England Recovery Center, what it's been like for you since coming into recovery, any of those there that are applicable.
Well, my journey for addiction began back in 1985. And, I had grown up through child abuse, foster homes, you name it, drugs in the home. And, I had gone from place to place. And at one point after the foster homes, I had, at a very, very young age, because I'll be 55 in 2 weeks, I had to learn a lot about a lot of things that we look at as normal now. Finding out, back in 1978 that your mother's gay. Back then it was, as a child, it wasn't realistic. We grew up thinking, hearing that word gay, whatnot, it was a bad thing. And, my parents, my dad being a severe alcoholic, my mother and dad always experimenting with drugs, having people over the house. And I was, dealing with so many different things. So over the years, as divorce took place, watching the beatings with my mother, watching us getting beatings, and many times I'd take a beating because my dad would line us up on certain times, and the idea was if one of us moved, we'd get more respect. So I would go ahead and keep moving so my sisters wouldn't get the bad end of it, and usually he'd give up, and I'd be the only one that would be on the receiving end of it. So for me, growing up the whole entire time, I had to constantly just try to find things in my mind to keep my mind off of what was actually happening. So I was fortunate enough that throughout the years, through high school, whatnot, I kept busy, with sports and whatnot. So I never really got involved in any kind of drugs or anything until my freshman year in high school. And at that point, I had already been in foster homes. I had tried living with my mom. I tried living with my dad, went back to my mom, and the abuse was all there. And I actually, believe it or not, I actually ran for class president for my sophomore year, and I won. The only thing was the beatings were so bad that in getting thrown out and all kinds of things, my mother had already, it was her second time attempting suicide. So I had gone to this place called Camp Aldersgate down in Rhode Island. It was the theater camp. And while I was there, I talked to the counselors and I broke down. So they talked, and I reached out to my aunt and uncle who actually got me into this particular camp. And I ended up staying with them. So and at that point, a lot of different things happened, and I was able to graduate high school. I was able to go to college, and I went for whole tourism management, and I became the party king there. The very first time that I really, really started to drink, all of a sudden, nothing really mattered. And all of a sudden I was the popular guy because I was holding the parties. And then all of a sudden at my second year in college, I'm basically getting involved. I created the very first Spirit of Boston. So I associated my popularity and all of a sudden being in management, everything else, with my alcohol, and the fact that all of a sudden I never really thought about a lot of these past problems that I had. So I never stopped and looked back. And that's where everything completely started for me. And everything I ever did, and I've always been in management, so I've always had free access to alcohol for over 35 years. And it went on and went on. I had a relationship for 25 years. I have two amazing boys. And thing was, I was telling Lisa, I was a dead man walking. And, December 2nd, 2019, a friend of mine, Nick, he had also been a manager of mine, beforehand in a restaurant. And I had invited him for dinner, and he said to me, he goes, well, he called me up and said he was going to be late. And I said to him, I said, fine, that's all right. So of course I'm doing my thing. And in my last 7.5 years of drinking, I was doing a handle and a half of Tito's a day. So he showed up and he said, you know something? He goes, God told me I needed to do this. And I said, what? He goes, so he gave me this little box. I opened it up and it's my name inscribed on a Bible. Of course, I didn't think anything of it, ate food, drank. He left. I did what I normally do and had a few nips, and then, sat down and passed out for a little bit, got up, went into bed. And realistically, at about 2:45 in the morning, I felt like someone reached down and ripped me out of bed. And I know it sounds like a crazy story, but it happened. I got up, got off the floor. Of course, I had my nips lined up because in order for me to take a shower in the morning so I wouldn't cut myself, I had to have drinks in me. Did a couple of shots, walked into the bathroom. I looked into the mirror and I started to cry. And I actually looked at myself and said, what have you done with your life? And I just crawled up on the floor on the ball in the bathroom, and I just cried for like an hour. And it was at that moment I realized that my life wasn't what I thought it was. So beginning that day, right up until the 13th, I started making phone calls, reaching out to people. And on the 13th, I actually had a meeting with my whole entire family and brought them in and let them know that I was an addict and that I was going to be going into rehab and that I needed to get some serious help. And then, of course, December 16th, I took my Uber over to New England Recovery Center. And literally from leaving from Townsend, Massachusetts to where I went to New England Recovery Center, I sucked down a sleeve of Tito's. And that was it for me. I got there and is where my life began. And I'll tell you, detox, I'll never wish it on anyone because it was just god awful. And Jesse, you know me. I mean, I went, they were on a mission. I knew at that point that I was at a fork in the road and the path that I was on didn't work. So when I got into New England recovery, I was on a mission, and I was telling Lisa, I had after the detoxing, I was, and I know this, I was even though I was probably one of the oldest ones there, I was constantly working out and doing the things, but I had heard a Christian song by singer Jeremy Camp, Dead Man Walking. And to this very day, I listen to it every single day because it reminds me that I was for 35 years, even though I was a manager, but I was never accountable for my own actions. And I was a dead man walking for a long, long time. And with all of you, I mean, you really, and I picked your brain. I was constantly trying to pull you guys aside. Hey, I got a question for you, because I realized that in order for me to move forward, I needed to ask the questions. I needed to, what I call, set my toolbox up so I could be successful in my recovery when I left. And you all gave me so many different tools, and I've utilized every aspect of them ever since.
Wow, Richard, that was amazing. I mean, I do know you, and I've known you from day one. When you mentioned that you were on a mission at NERC when you came in, I remember probably the first time I met you, you had that big, thick book with you, and it was like the physical fitness certification trainer or something. And
yes,
I didn't think much of it at first because people bring all sorts of things with them to treatment, and we just, especially at the new year, we want to lose weight and we want to get better with our finances and we want to, spend more time with family. It's all these different things sort of come together, and people show up with all these different goals at Detox. But if you could just talk a little bit about that and what you did with that big fat book with the your fitness journey?
That fat book was my study guide for international sports medicine. And I had many years ago, I came up with this concept of what it is that I do now. Thing is, God has a plan. And my plan was I needed to go through the lessons that I didn't like to get ready for where I'm at today. But that book, I was studying nutrition, learning about foods. I pretty much have every food allergy that there is. And my youngest son has eosinophilic esophagitis, EOE for short, which is a food-based disease that affects the esophagus and the digestive system. So I had to learn on top of my addiction and management, everything else, I had to learn about food. And what I realized many years ago is that food is medicine. And today, I'll be honest with you, if I didn't eat the way that I did, with as much as I drank, I don't think I'd be alive today. So for me, once I started, of course I dabble in it and whatnot, and I didn't finish anything, but once I got into NERC, my whole thought process completely changed. And especially with the Bible. I never ever thought about reading. I read a little bit of the Bible every single day. If I'm not reading it, I have something in the background that's going over scripture. Because it is not just a story, but realistically, it's a guideline. And when I look at, and I do have a saying now, a healthy lifestyle shouldn't include a childproof cat. Food is a guideline. It's something that's natural. It's not man-made, and I look at, and I never look at these things, but when you asked me what I was doing there, this is the process of me learning about what really works. And the moment I started picking up that book, it wasn't an addiction, but it made me realize something that, wait a minute, there's more to what's going on with us as human beings as to what we see on commercials and what we hear on radio and what we have for subliminal images that are thrown in front of us every single day. So that's what I did. And I was on a journey and I haven't stopped ever since. So since I've gotten out of there, I've created NutritiveAfitness. I am now a success coach. I work with people that are dealing in all different forms of recovery, because I have a saying that, no matter what, someone's recovering from something every single day. And when people look at the word recovery, the automatic thing people think of is addiction. And as much as addiction is part of recovery, but if you wake up in the morning, you stub your toe, how are you going to recover from that moment? Are you going to crawl up in a ball and call it a day? Or are you going to be grateful that you didn't break your toe and realize the day's only going to get better? But none of this would have been possible if I had never made the first step. And that was admitting to where I was and literally just letting go of the wheel. I was always, being in management, basically my whole life, I was always what I thought in control. And I never had to be accountable. And the reason being is because I could always tell people what needed to be done. And I could articulate and get it done. And if someone did something wrong, I could say to them, well, you messed this up, you need to fix it. That way, I never had to be accountable. And where I learned that real first aspect of, wow, I got to really take a look at me, was when I looked in the mirror. And then, of course, being in New England Recovery Center for the whole entire month, because I spent the month bothering you. But I learned there that at that moment, that place, all of you, this was my set of resources to set me up once I got back into the real world. Did we not know that once I got out, the world was going to turn upside down backwards? No. No one's seen it coming, but it did. But if it wasn't for all of you and the lessons and whatnot, I never would have been able to succeed and be where I'm at today. And, in gratitude for me, once I, when I left New England Recovery Center, I went into the sober home in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, on January 16th. By February 23rd, I actually got baptized. And the ironic thing was literally 2 weeks after I got baptized, I was getting ready to go to bed, and I heard this little voice in my head that said, if I was able to keep what I said I was grateful for that day, what would I have? And it scared the living daylights out of me because I realized I would have had absolutely nothing. So myself being a runner, so the very next day I decided to go run 13 miles. And during that 13 miles, for every mile I ran, I said what I was grateful for. So in my personal self, I created, so when I run, I call it my run for gratefulness. And, you know, I went ahead this past December. I had, actually last December, I had reconstructive surgery on my ear. Right after that, Mass Eye and Ear asked me if I would be willing to run the Falmouth Road Race. So I can honestly say that at the age of 55, well, soon to be 55, I did the Falmouth Road Race in 69 minutes. I was upset with myself because I wanted to beat an hour, but that's coming up. And then I've just been offered to run the Boston Marathon coming up. So I've accepted the challenge. So, and that's what I look at life. Life is a journey. And we can either take our situations that we've been in and allow it to beat us up, or we can live in the now and love the moment. And that's what I do. But I learned that 2 years ago. I had to realize that being that dead man walking, that person no longer existed. And once I came out of New England recovery, I went to go play a game of golf with buddies of mine, and I started to cry. And I cried because I'm sitting down, and all of a sudden I look at this blade of grass, and it's prisming all these amazing colors because of the dew in the morning and the sun was hitting it. And they're like, dude, what's going on with you? I'm like, isn't that beautiful? They're like, what are you talking? I said, look at that blade of grass. I said, I've never, ever seen something so beautiful, something so simple. I said, I've never had taken the time to ever notice things like that. And even today, with all that goes on, I'm alive. I am no longer that dead man walking. But recovery is something that would be part of my life every single day. You know, because whether it is addiction, or you almost get into a car accident, or you slip and fall, or if you're working out and you're feeling sore, or you're dieting or whatnot, there's a psychological aspect of recovery. And my whole thing is, how are we going to deal with that? You know, what are the questions that we're going to ask? You know, are we too prideful to get out of our own skin? Are we too afraid of being uncomfortable? You know, my whole thing is that we need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's what helps us succeed. It helps us move forward, you know. And I've been working with someone who is very dear to me. And realistically, I happened to hear the song the other day, which is kind of right down the line, called There Is No Fear in Love. And it struck a chord with me because through recovery, many times we've lost who we were. We don't trust ourselves. We don't have faith in ourselves. We have no hope. And many times we have no gratitude. So one of the things that I work with, or shall I say, when I work with people, our life is consists of nutrition, physical, spiritual, emotional, and mental. And if just one of those things are out of whack, it's all out of whack. We're completely out of balance. And who we are as human beings, we are so into instant gratification, especially being Americans. Americans, we are a very, very spoiled society. We make up 4.7% of the world's population, but yet we consume 80% of the world's opioids. It's frightening. And then when it comes to overall medications, we consume 93%. People understand that. You went on many other countries, Canada is number 2 and Germany is number 3. But the only time they ever prescribe anything is if you're dying. Not even after surgery. You get surgery, you're getting Tylenol. You know? So to me, it's like looking at how we are and the way we just want that instant gratification so much. Instant gratification, whether it's texting, whether it's trying to see who liked me on Facebook or whatnot, it's a form of addiction. It's a form of people not having faith in themselves. They need that stamp to say, you're good, as opposed to looking at ourselves and saying, I like me today. And that's why, to me, gratitude is so powerful. And even my oldest son, he's like, Dad, he goes, you realize my friends are following you? And they're like, you're doing things and you're saying things that are making people think. My whole thing is that gratitude list that we learned, I pretty much utilize it as part of when we wake up. If we start writing down what we're grateful for, that list each day gets longer and longer. And it starts, I always talk about gratitude is consider that many people, especially through depression and everything else, or that are with an addiction, we're living in this black abyss. And we don't have gratitude, we don't have hope. But once we start having that gratitude, it's kind of like all of a sudden this little light goes on. And once that light goes on, it starts to switch to direction. And as we start seeing more and more what we're grateful for, then all of a sudden hope and faith and love become part of that whole program. And that's how we really, focus on ourselves, because recovery is all about us. Recovery is selfish. And if we don't love ourselves, it's very difficult to love anyone else. If we don't work on ourselves, how can we ever do anything for anyone else? But I never saw any of that. Being management, everything else, I never ever looked at that aspect of life. Took it for whatever it is. If the doctor said this, I just went with it. But realistically, what the information that's out there, because everything, and I always say there's no money in the United States in people being healthy. If everyone was healthy, who's making money? And it's frightening, so my journey, that I'm on, I believe that the 35 years of my addiction and all the different things that I've been through, and someone says, well, how do you know all this stuff? And I was like, well, number one, it's experience. Not a whole lot that someone can say you don't understand, because I have. I've been through child abuse. I've been homeless. I've been through addiction. I've been in jail. There's so many different things that I've been there. But I've always been able to find a way to take that lesson and turn it into an opportunity to learn something new. And I think a lot of people are afraid to do that. And I think a lot of people just get locked into the sorrow and just lose faith in themselves. And I know that I'm rambling, but it's a powerful, powerful thing that we have to believe in ourselves. Everything begins with the belief in us. Of course, I choose to believe in God first, but after that, we need to believe in ourselves.
So a couple of things. First, thank you so much for sharing your story. You're a wonderful storyteller. And so
thank you.
This is a great episode because I think it'll really touch a lot of people, which I know is one of your goals for being here. And of course, our goal in general, right, in this podcast. But as a clinician, a couple of things really jump out to me in your story. One is, when you were just talking about kind of that having to have faith in yourself, a lot of that is identity, right? And so you also talked about when you started getting into drinking and how tied to your identity alcohol was, because that was what kind of got you popular or was part of your connected to people and in college and in the restaurant scene and all of that. And then as I hear you talk about your recovery, you start to shift that identity, right, to be, that recovery is part of my identity, right? Yes. And keeps you in the center of that, right? And that's part of you. And the other thing that really strikes me as a clinician is how well you clearly describe what something that's so hard for all of us, right? In January, I think is the perfect time for us to consider that. And that is that balance, right? That whole person approach to wellness. Because especially now, people actually in January, in my opinion, sometimes tend to get further out of balance because they'll over focus on the diet, the whatever extreme workout, whatever kind of extreme lifestyle shift they want to make, that they're all of a sudden going to go from 0 to 100 on January 1st. And I really appreciate your kind of setting up that clear idea of that whole person balance, right? That that health, fitness, self-love, nutrition, emotional, spirituality, right? And how all of those things have to be in balance in order for you to have wellness. So can you talk a little bit more about, your approach to wellness?
Yeah. I look at I'll give you an idea when I sit down and have a conversation with someone who needs whether it's someone that's looking to be on a diet, someone who wants to gain muscle tone, whether it's someone that has type 2 diabetes or whatnot. I actually give people what I call a 3-day food journal, because I want to see what people are intaking, because no matter what we do, what we put into us, we are going to transcend, whether it's getting sick, whether it's not, if we're constantly watching negative things on TV or whatnot, it's stimulating stuff within inside of us. So I like to see the nutritional value first, because then I can kind of sit back and say, well, they're having, too much of this, too much of that. Look at the sugar intake, look at the caffeine intake, look at that. Because if we're not eating naturally, we're messing with cells and chromosomes in our body, endorphins, all of that stuff. So when we are on a natural plane, we're able to kind of sit back and kind of do an adjustment on, what, this actually feels right. And people now, when all of a sudden they decide, when I get them eating nice and healthy and clean and organic and whatnot, and then they go cheat, they're like, dude, I don't like you anymore. I'm like, why? They're like, because I went and had that Burger King and I felt sick for 3 days. I'm like, because it's your body telling you that you don't need it. But it's the same thing, though, is about spiritually getting fed. Information that we receive, what do we do with that? How are we processing that? And are we able to take, and I'm a huge, I like to try utilizing my Sundays or sometimes Saturdays, believe it or not, just as a day of quiet. I don't put music on or I stay in touch with myself. I do a lot of praying, and it's just a way for me to kind of just reboot my whole entire body, because you figure everything that we do on a day-to-day basis, there's stress around us all the time. And you go to the supermarket, how many times I'll see someone, the cashier, and they're just frowning. I'm like, are we having a bad day today? Well, I'm like, you know what though? I said, be grateful. You're working. And I said, and look at that beautiful smile. And all of a sudden they'll smile and I'll say, see, there you go. And then I'll say something that they may not know. And I said, look at that. It's already a great day. Why? I said, because you just learned something new. Wow, you're right. So I said, see, it's a great day. So I honestly believe that what we need to do in order to keep ourselves moving forward, especially because of recovery, it's so easy to fall into negativity, because what's surrounding us every day now? Fear. Every time you turn on that TV or anytime you listen to the radio, it's about the jab, what's going on around us. It's about politics. It's about this. It's about that. But it presents fear. Thing is, though, and I've said it, Franklin D. Roosevelt said, fear is what we fear fear itself. And it's a reality. Because on average, if we just worry about ourselves, everything else takes care of itself. We have to make sure that we're number one. And we need to set ourselves up for what makes us feel good. Just because a doctor says this is what you need to do, but if you ask a doctor something about nutrition, they're the first ones that are going out down the street to McDonald's and getting 2 cheeseburgers, a large fry, and a soda. So if you're going to be talking about someone, well, you just had a heart attack, you need to do this. Well, why are you not practicing what you're saying to people not to do? And it happens all the time in so many different aspects. And that's why we literally need to take that time to understand that things were put on this planet naturally for a reason. I mean, medication wasn't around forever. And realistically, even with antibiotics, many of them, what do? They break our immune system. So yeah, we may get better for one thing, but all of a sudden we get sick for something else. And I'm such an advocate as far as the nutrition aspect goes, because food is thy medicine. And the good thing about food, there's no disclaimer that says may cause 500 things.
Have you seen folks so commonly we'll see kind of, kind of food sometimes as a replacement and a bit of a substitution in recovery, right? Especially in early recovery, is that especially sugar has a lot of addictive properties, and if you're not feeling well, you're looking for something to help you feel better, right? And whether it's acute withdrawal or post-acute withdrawal, it's uncomfortable, and it's uncomfortable for a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't kind of go away quickly, and often, sugar especially can be, a bit of means to manage that, but then kind of can create its own challenges. Have you seen that in the recovery community? And do you have any advice for folks who kind of are looking to have kind of a clean eating kind of nutrition approach to their recovery?
Oh yeah, I mean, I do all the time. I mean, my family, it's like they always used to say, you're crazy, because I've had these ideas for a long time. They always, now all of a sudden they're following. Thing is like many people that are in recovery, and like you said, they're substituting. Sugar is so bad because it creates inflammation in the body. And anything that creates inflammation in the body creates illness. It creates anxiety. It creates depression. It creates type 2 diabetes. It creates insomnia. It can contribute to people having celiacs. So that fixation of sugar, it's an artificial so-called high. The idea is to find more natural products that work with the endorphins and all the different, about stimulating how we feel. And you can have that same fixation of that sugar flavor, but you can find stuff that don't have real sugar in it. And that's the idea. It's being able to trick yourself. Well, I like the sweetness. I like the fizziness. Okay, but you can have fizziness, but you can have a healthy fizziness. What about taking, instead of having that particular sit down and have a coffee with 15 sugars, what about going for a walk? What about maybe making a smoothie, and instead of having sugar in there, you're putting maybe a little bit of honey for the same exact thing. Of course, a sweetener is a sweetener, but if it's a natural sweetener, it's not the white processed, chemically treated, which our livers basically and our pancreas have a hard time processing anyway. But again, the idea is recognizing that, and that's same thing when people go to the gym. They, all of a sudden they think they need to go to the gym for 4 hours a day. No, you don't. You're killing your body. You realistically, to stay healthy, you need just a half hour working out every single day. Utilizing just weights, but nutrition is so key. It's so important because the idea is to find stuff that's anti-inflammatory. And there's so much information out there, because once there's inflammation, we're in trouble. We are very, very much in trouble. And that's something that I've always been about, is I don't eat fatty foods. I don't eat fried foods. I don't eat many breads. If I do, they're very, very specific. I don't do anything that's not considered non-GMO, and I don't do anything that's not organic. And people worry about that stuff being expensive, but it's not, especially during the spring, the summer, and the fall. We always have the farmers markets, and they basically give their stuff away. And there's so many ways of getting that stuff and keeping it, because processed foods, unfortunately in recovery, so many people, and there's not enough resources out there to help people. So people are eating their processed foods, the sandwich meats. You might as well just drink poison, because it's killing people on a regular basis. But it's money making. So it's not helping people out. So that's why I really work with people, and I teach people how to look at labels and understand, if you're drinking a soda, you're putting 14 teaspoons of sugar on that 120-ounce bottle of soda. You're putting 14 teaspoons of sugar in your body, and your body can't process it. It just can't. And the thing is, that sugar, you're going up and you're crashing. So what happens? They get another soda or whatever, the Monster drinks or anything, to bring themselves back up. Where there's natural foods that do the same thing, except you don't crash. You stay energized, whether it's natural ginseng, whether it's ginger, whether it's, making sure that you put a little bit of turmeric, which again, takes away that inflammation. Once there's no inflammation, we feel you float. You really do. It just changes how you wake up in the morning. I don't do any caffeine. I don't do coffee. I don't do any of that stuff. I wake up and I sing. but it's so important. But the thing is when you're looking at TV and all these commercials, take this vitamin, take that vitamin. It's like the D word, dieting. 94% of all diets in the United States fail. And the reason being is because we're depleting our bodies out of nutrition that we absolutely need. And if we just eat the proper way, and again, I'm going to incorporate all of it. When you're thinking straight, when you're eating straight and you're exercising, everything else works. And for me, I mean, and if whether, no matter what, at the end of the day, we have to believe in something greater than ourselves. We can't live this life by ourselves. It's just not possible. And if we just totally rely on ourselves, chances are we're going to keep failing. And I will always mention, my faith is in God, but we always have to believe in something else. And especially in order for us to move forward, because it gives us that hope, it gives us that faith. And as long as we have that, then we're moving forward. And that's why, when we get out and when we're recovering, and I remember just seeing the difference of people eating 15 ice creams and whatnot, and just not loving life. Because at that moment, we're so saturated in this negativity. And then when we're putting all this negative food in us, we're not feeling good. We're not feeling vibrant. Whatever energy that we may have, we're sapping it. And because we're falsely creating this stimulant, and then we're just crashing. So it feeds upon that negative energy. So when we're putting natural, healthy stuff into us, we keep this nice positive flow.
Richard, I'm sitting here and I've had the pleasure of knowing you for the past 2+ years and just watching your recovery journey. But I'm sitting here thinking if someone tunes in right now, they're going to maybe double check the name of this podcast and think they jumped into like a food or nutrition fitness podcast. And I don't want it to get it lost that, I know your story. And I heard you say earlier that, prior to getting sober for 7 years, you were drinking 1.5 handles of Tito's vodka every day.
Yeah.
And you said that you had the nips lined up on your bedside table where you needed them literally to function. So as someone in recovery, I'm looking at your journey and I'm looking at the big picture and I'm looking at the all or nothing, what your last 2 years have been. So you went from someone that's pouring all that vodka into your body and knowing that you have these allergies and knowing, no one shows up to detox with a fitness journal and something to be a fitness coach without first thinking about it. And for 35 years, I heard you say, you knew this stuff and you did it for a little while and then fell off, and then sort of everything came together, and you're new in recovery and you're eating healthy, maybe consistently for the first time, and oh, by the way, you're not pouring all that vodka down your throat, so you're feeling better because of that too. And I'm hearing you say a lot about these sort of secondary recovery, right? And I was talking to another person in recovery from alcohol just this morning, celebrated a year in recovery, and then had a conversation about some other addictions, right? And in recovery, we talk about peeling the layers of the onion back, because like you said, there's always something we're recovering from.
Yeah.
And another big picture thing that I picked up from you is, here's Richard showing up day one at New England Recovery Center on December 16th, 2019, thinking about a healthy journey. And here we are in 2022, and you're going to run the Boston Marathon. I mean, I can't think of a better way to describe it than, a plan without action is just a dream. Right.
You're
and
right.
You've been putting in this action through NutritiveAfitness, through being a success coach. We haven't even talked yet about something you have coming up called the 1,000 Roads to Recovery. And as we are wrapping up here, I wanted to make sure that people listening to this and people watching this live has an opportunity to engage with you. So what is 1,000 Roads to Recovery?
1,000 Roads to Recovery is a show that I'm going to be talking about, because no matter what we are, no matter where we come from, we will always deal with some form of recovery every single day, multiple times a day. The extent of recovery is different. But I think at the end of the day, when so many people, and I was talking to somebody the other day, is when people are in jail, when they're incarcerated, when they come out, they're almost like they're learning the world all over again. Someone needs to die. Someone's dieting. There's trauma to them. When people are recovering from addiction, are they going to transfer their addiction to another addiction? Or are they going to learn how to start moving forward, how to put things together? But there's not enough resources out there. So 1,000 Roads to Recovery basically is my way of letting people know that you're not alone. And that whether you stub your toe, whether you're coming off of an addiction, whether you have this need to be liked all the time. Question is, how are you going to find yourself? How are you going to be happy with yourself? What are the tools that you're going to utilize? Like the tools that I've learned since I left New England Recovery Center. I mean, when I left, I had my toolbox is overflowing. I look at the 12 steps. I've gone to NA, I've gone to AA, I've gone to Al-Anon. Of course, I'm part of church, and I still, even though I'm not, I don't go to them, I visit once in a while because of the fellowship. And if I can offer something a little bit different, and part of the recovery is to get the word out there that there are many, many people out there that need help, because a lot of this is all mental health. The question is what are the avenues that people are taking? Are they relying on a prescription? Are they relying on going to the gym too much? Are they relying on eating too much? Are they relying on doing stuff like watching porn on TV? How are they handling that situation? So 1,000 Roads to Recovery is getting information out there that there are so many beneficial ways through nutrition, through spiritual, through emotional, different ways of understanding. But more than anything, loving ourselves. It all begins loving ourselves, because nothing is possible until we love ourselves. And that begins by gratitude, hope, faith, which will equal love. And that's what 1,000 Roads to Recovery is all about.
And I love that title, right? Because I think one of our first podcasts with me as a co-host, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to dig through the archives. But one of the guests kind of said, which has stuck with me since, right? There's no one way in to addiction, and there's no one way out through recovery, right? And so I love that title, right? 1,000 Roads to Recovery, because I think it really highlights that everybody needs to have that balance, right? That whole person approach, that centeredness in themselves, right? But how they get there and what the components of their recovery plan can look a little different, right? Like what path they choose, what spirituality is helpful for them, what kind of daily practice is helpful for them, what paths they choose, what kinds of things that they are interested in that kind of keep them in balance. But they can all lead to, recovery, just, 1,000 different roads. So I wanted to comment. I love that title.
Because if you think about it, we are all perfectly imperfect people. But what works for you is not going to work for me. What works for me is not going to work for Jesse, because we all think differently. Physically, we're different. Our mechanisms are different. Our chromosomes are different. Our cell makeup is a little bit different. So that's why it's so important for our journeys to be focused so much on us, because there'd be 10 people in the room and our journey is all going to be completely different. Whether, like you said, going into addiction and then our life of recovery, because someone may come from a multi-million-dollar home. Someone might come from the streets, depending on what the resources are out there. So that's why it all begins with faith. It begins with us loving ourselves, because that's how we set ourselves up for success. We can't worry about what someone else thinks about us. One of these things, when people go to the gym, they're worried about what people are thinking about them. If you think about it, people go to the gym, no one's looking at somebody else. They couldn't care less. They're too busy worrying about what they're going to look like. But we are so eager to worry about what other people think. At the end of the day, it all matters, because we come into this world by ourselves and we leave by ourselves. At the end of the day, how do we feel? Are we happy? Do we know that we're accountable for ourselves and that we are 100% of where we want to be? And if the answer is no, then that means we need to work on ourselves. It's our own accountability. And that's what I do. I make sure that we are accountable for our own actions. We're accountable for our own health. We're accountable for our own emotions. And someone said, what happens if you get this traumatic experience, mental health, whatever depression kicks in, anxiety, are we responsible and accountable for making us better? And I said, you may hate the answer, but the answer is yes. Because if you're not reaching out and you're just relying on what everyone tells you, then you're never going to honestly succeed. Because if you're medicated, well, realistically, a lot of whether it's Ativan or they're benzos, or what are benzos, or it's another form of an addiction. It's just controlled by the special interest. The idea is, how do you want to live your life as healthy as you possibly can, according to how you know that you feel? And that's the important thing. And if we feel empty someplace, then we got work to do.
Richard, I'm hearing a lot of a certain theme that I wanted to just point out as we're coming to a close here in this episode of Airing Addiction. I'm hearing you say in a multitude of different ways that it starts with self. It starts with us, right? It starts with the person in recovery. There's resources out there like NutritiveAfitness that you started since your time at New England Recovery Center. There's other holistic resources because as another theme that I'm picking up that if it starts with self and self wants to recover from something, pick a thing, an adverse childhood experience, a substance, a behavior, a food addiction, whatever it may be, looking at it holistically, looking at it from all aspects of ourself is the best way to go about it. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there's a certain National Football League quarterback that is 44 years old. And a lot of what you're saying is a lot of what I'm hearing with his method, just to play football longer and not be in recovery longer. I just say that to say that, it works. Yeah. It works. You're a shining example of this working. You're not only talking about this, but I know from our conversations and your continued engagement here with NERC and the clients here long after, over 2 years after you've come out of here, it continues to work. Your life continues to improve. Your life, I understand even you're planning a trip soon.
Yes. Yeah.
Where might that be?
Yeah, I cannot wait. Well, I'll be doing olive oil tasting in Italy. And again, something as simple as, extra virgin olive oil, people don't realize how much of a superfood it actually is. But again, it has to be organic. It has to come from a single region, but there's, and just simple things like that. People are like, how'd you know about, I never knew that. I'm like, that's why, I'm out here doing what I'm doing, because there's so many natural resources just to really help us in so many different ways. And that's why, like I said, emotional, physical, mental, spiritually, and conditionally, all of those, if they're all in balance, life is just, you just feel positive every single day, but it's up to us to really find it. And when we're in recovery, we need to ask questions. We need to ask help. We can't have so much pride that we're afraid to ask, because if we're not asking, we're not learning. And if we're not learning, we're not moving forward, and I did, when I was there, I was asking questions after every class. I was raising my hand everywhere. Hey, can we talk for a few minutes? Because we have to, because it's our life. It's our life, and we can either just succumb to whatever's around us, or we can say we want to be 100% of ourselves. But it's not easy. It'll never be easy.
Questions, right? You have to ask. You have to ask. You have to find out what your recovery path is.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So that's actually a perfect segue into, is there anything, we often will ask guests kind of for, a favorite resource, a favorite book, or, podcast, or something that we can leave our listeners kind of with. Is there anything that you would kind of point folks to start to do their own inquiry?
Well, I'll be honest. There is a podcast that I listen to. His name is Brad Jensen. He's an amazing nutritionist, personal trainer, and everything else. And he was a 10-year heroin addict. He was been homeless. He actually tells a story about him. Actually, his mother, he was in the back seat, and he didn't have any choice, but he put a needle in his arm with her having to watch. They disowned him for a while. He's now making 7 figures a year. He's amazing. It's called Key Nutrition. And he constantly talks about recovery and talks about spirituality, and really it brings guests on. And it's amazing in the field how many have actually been addicts or that have suffered from severe depression and anxiety. So that's one podcast and it's been going on for 3 years now. He's absolutely amazing. He's very straightforward, and everyone that they bring in and they talk about the heart, they talk about getting in touch. They talk about, and with him, talk about the 12 steps, because the 12 steps I think should be called the 12 steps of life. Because if everyone followed them, this world would be a much happier place, because it allows us to keep in touch with ourselves and to really understand where we need and the work that we need to do on ourselves. And then a book that I really like, it's called The Recovering Intoxication and Its Aftermath. And it's by Leslie Jameson. And it really delves down into, especially for those with alcohol and addictions, of different scenarios of what happened and how all of a sudden the idea of that particular addiction, it's almost like it's a toy. It's almost like it's something that's fun. But then as time goes on, we realize how just everything starts to implode. So I kind of really enjoyed that book quite a bit.
What was the name of that book again?
It's called The Recovery, Intoxication, and Its Aftermath. Okay. And it's by Leslie Jameson.
Perfect. We can link, in the show notes, we can drop in kind of the information about both the podcast and the book for our listeners.
And I definitely will be checking out both of those resources. So in wrapping up, Richard, I just wanted to say again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, your journey, your just testimony of hope of someone who showed up to detox, not knowing what the next step was, but took that next step and continues to take that next step, and have already helped so many people. And I know there's going to be many more people placed in your path to help. And if you're out there and you're listening to us, or you're watching this on Facebook Live, and you're one of those people that is checking this out because you do need help, or because some part of you clicked on the link or saw something in your social media feed, please feel free to follow us on Facebook. Look for the Airing Addiction Podcast anywhere that you subscribe to podcasts. Hit that subscribe button. We do many episodes, this being the first of many for 2022. So I just wanted to thank my co-host Lisa. I wanted to thank James behind the scenes for a successful first Airing Addiction of 2022 with way more to come. Thank you so much, everybody. See you next.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, everyone.